Hello everybody and welcome to another video. If you are brand new here, this is the anniversary with me, Yinka Bokinni. And it's a true crime series that I tell you about a case on the anniversary of it happening. And this week, it's the anniversary of the ABC killer, aka the South African Strangler, aka Moses Sithole, who was a South African serial killer who was active for a year between 1994 and 1995. He began his killings this week, 26 years ago. Shwananana, shwananana, shwananana. I wanted to dip out of the UK for this week's story. I've kept it pretty homegrown with the crime tales that I've told you in the last few weeks. A lot of them are huge cases where there's loads of information, and I kind of wanted to flex my research muscles a little bit and get stuck into a story that you may not know, especially if, like me, you are not from South Africa. Moses Sithole, whose name is spelt a lot like shithole, and if the shoe fits, was born in 1964 in a poor province in South Africa. His dad died when he was super young, and his mum left him to fend for himself along with his siblings. He spent a lot of his childhood in and out of orphanages before ending up in Johannesburg in his teens. His descent into the killer that he would become came in the late 80s. He spent 6 or 7 years in prison for several rapes perpetrated against several women. Now, he has always denied these assaults, but he has said as well that it was this stint in prison that turned him into the killer that he would become. It's quite ironic that he was released on good behaviour and he went on to kill so soon after he got out of prison for the rapes. He said that in the faces of the women that he would go on to kill, he saw his false accusers. 18-year-old Maria Monene Manama was the first of an estimated 40 women that Sithole killed. His MO was simple but extremely effective. He lured his victims in with the promises of work. He appeared to be a mild-mannered individual to those around him. At the time of his crimes, he was managing a charity which was devoted to the eradication of child abuse. He came across as extremely polite and well put together. He was well spoken. He was a gentleman. And that is how he got his victims to trust him almost immediately. He promised a job at his charity, and what he would do is befriend women and then tell them that he wanted to employ them, explain that he needed to walk to the business premises, like follow me across this field, and that's when he would switch and that's when he would brutalize them. Moses Sithole was known as the ABC killer, and this was because of the location of his crimes, the first of which were in Attridgeville, then Boksburg, and eventually Cleveland, so A, B, and C. By 1995, he had claimed over 30 victims in just a year. This ignited a nationwide panic, especially because in some cases, he would call the victims' families and taunt them. This guy is one of the most prolific serial killers that I've ever researched, that I've ever spoke about in this series, and the fact that he was only an active killer for a year is just mind-blowing. The media coverage on the killings was intensified when a body of a child was found with one of the victims. The mother had met Sithole at a train station. He had offered her a job and she didn't have any childcare, so she took the 2-year-old with her. He killed her and then he hit the baby over the head, leaving the toddler to die of exposure. The police were forced to recognise that there was an active serial killer, not only because of how similar the murders were. The victims were stripped, they were tied up, they were raped, and then they were strangled with their own underwear, but also because of the timeline of murders. Too many bodies were showing up, they were too close together, and it couldn't have just been a grisly coincidence. Sithole was almost caught in July 1995 when a witness saw a man acting suspiciously with a woman before the pair walked off. It didn't sit right on the witness's chest, so they went to go and investigate, and they discovered the body of Josephine Mansali, who was aged 25. She had been brutally raped and murdered moments before, but the witness didn't get a good enough look at the perpetrator, at Moses Sithole, and he was able to carry on with his crimes. This is just so shameless because, you think of killers in the dead of night, you think of them during the graveyard hours of like 3 and 5 a.m, stalking lone women on lone paths. But somebody saw this woman alive thought, I wonder if she's all right, and she'd been killed. A mass grave was discovered and it had 10 bodies in it, each with varying degrees of decomposition. This case was so big that even the president, Nelson Mandela at the time, visited the scene of the discovery of the bodies. The search for the killer was massive, and they even called the FBI in to provide some assistance and to help put a profile together of the killer, because this is someone that was going province to province. This was somebody who was brutalising black women. They just couldn't find him. Investigations at the gravesite revealed that one of the victims, Amelia Rapadil, had last been seen before an appointment to see a man called Moses Sithole. And then, when a second victim showed a similar connection to Sithole, the police were confident they had unearthed the likely suspect. They were unable, though, to locate Sithole. He continued with his killing spree. A newspaper called The Star received a call from a man claiming to be the killer. He had information that was not known to the general public. Police were inclined to believe that it was Sithole, and an attempt to set up a meeting with him actually failed. But then 3 more bodies were found in the next 10 days, which forced police to release Sithole's details to the media. So now the manhunt was in the public domain. I think it shows you how desperate the police were becoming to just find this guy. And he was flaunting himself. It's like, I'm not saying that, he should have done better to not get caught, but he could have done better to not get caught if he didn't want to get catch. The manhunt was now in the public domain, and Sithole tried to seek assistance from family members, but an undercover police officer intercepted him on October the 18th, 1995. He did not go quietly when he was caught. He got shot in the leg, he was shot in the stomach, he was hospitalised, he underwent surgery, and then was transferred to a secure military hospital. That is where he admitted to numerous killings in interviews with detectives. The trial was a mess. He wasn't read his rights properly. According to police, he waived his right to have an attorney, but he denied that while the trial was going on. There was a potentially illegal confession tape taken in his cell while he was on remand. He admitted to killing 29 women to another inmate, and he even gave gruesome details of how he did it. But because the tape was filmed under questionable circumstances, it took a long time for the court to decide whether or not it was admissible in the trial. But ultimately, on December the 4th, 1997, more than a year after the case had commenced, Moses Sithole was found guilty on all 38 charges of murder and 40 charges of rape. He was imprisoned for 50 years for each murder charge and 12 years for each rape charge. He was also found guilty of 6 charges of robbery, which received 5 years each. Effectively, he was sentenced to 2,410 years in prison, with a minimum of 930 years. He will be eligible for parole in 2,927. Basically, his sentencing was just meant to keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. This case was actually really hard to research, and there were super limited resources on it. I think partly because it's a South African crime, and a lot of the websites that I looked at that looked like they could provide a lot of information just wouldn't let me in. Of course, I've put all the research that I did in the description box, but it's not as extensive as it usually is. But there you have it. That was the case of Moses Sithole, the ABC killer, the South African strangler, who began his year-long reign of terror 26 years ago this week. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you guys have a good day.